Well, if you aren't watching the video series The Chosen, you are missing out on some pretty cool stuff. I highly recommend it. There's this website that I like. I don't know, every time now I just want some entertainment, light, fun. It's called BuzzFeed. Anybody a fan of BuzzFeed, right? And BuzzFeed often has these like little lists of, 19 things that you didn't know if you were born before 1990 or whatever. There's different kind of list things. And one of the things they'll often do is they'll do a BuzzFeed segment, best and worst celebrities. And what they'll do is they'll gather collections of people's stories of who's met a celebrity, tell us something about them. And people will send in their worst encounter with a celebrity and what jerks they were. Or people will send in, oh, so-and-so's the nicest person. I met them backstage or at their show, and they were the kindest person. They did this, and they tell a story about a celebrity, sort of behind-the-scenes thing on these special people. And there's just fun stuff on BuzzFeed. So let me ask you, all you Christians who know the celebrity Jesus Christ, tell me something about him other people wouldn't know. What do you know about Jesus that other people wouldn't know? I mean, you're friends, right? You and Jesus know each other, so tell me something about the celebrity Jesus that other people wouldn't know. I'll give you one. He likes riddles, right? Now, I know if you ask him, he'll say, I don't speak in riddles at all. I speak the plain truth. It's your tiny brain that can't figure stuff out, right? And probably true. But it comes across as a riddle to me. The thing about why it's a riddle is Jesus never tells you everything up front. He always tells you information in bits and pieces. Am I lying, Christians? Am I right? It's true. He never tells you the whole story up front. He tells it to you in bits and pieces. That's something about Jesus, the celebrity, that you might not know. This famous Jesus, that's what he does all the time. He speaks in riddles. Well, our tiny brain takes him as riddles. To him, it's absolute truth. I'll tell you something else about Jesus that's kind of interesting is he never yells. Jesus never yells, right? Yelling is an attempt to get control. You think Jesus is ever out of control? Jesus is never out of control. So if you're praying and you hear a voice in your head that's kind of yelling at you and condemning you and criticizing you or shouting at you, I can tell you right now, that voice in your head ain't Jesus. Jesus never yells. He doesn't have to. Interesting thing about him. Something else about Jesus you might not know. Jesus loves hopeless situations. Me, I'm not a big fan of them myself. I've had several, many. I'm not a big fan of hopeless situations, but Jesus, he loves hopeless situations. And oftentimes, he loves putting his children in hopeless situations. Why does he love such a thing? Well, it creates a dependency on him. He likes to create the dependency on him. He likes it when it's over and it's all said and done that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt Jesus did it because I sure couldn't have. He loves that scenario where that praise, that glory, that honor to him from our lives, from our hearts emerges. He loves it because it's the crucial defining moment of our faith when we move from this concept of belief in Jesus into trusting Jesus. He loves a hopeless situation because it moves us from this nebulous world of, oh, I believe Jesus was the Son of God and died on the cross for my sins. It's kind of this generic idea into, I know Jesus will rescue me and I trust him. He loves hopeless situations because it makes that move from belief to trust in our faith journey. Like I said, I'm not such a big fan of them myself, right? Today, we're going to look at two people who were in hopeless situations that drove them to Jesus. And we're going to take a look at what their hopeless situations were and how their relationship with Jesus changed and emerged and gave them a unique perspective that other people didn't have because of their hopeless situations. If you have a Bible, turn with me to Matthew chapter 9. And I knew it was wrong. I knew I didn't have my lighting right. Can you give me my lighting, scene 4? Because I'm not seeing this down here very well. So we provide these Bibles. They're on the tables. They're on the end rows. Grab a Bible if you need one. You want to follow along. I am not putting many verses up on the screen today because I want you to touch a Bible and open it for yourselves. Ooh, right? So you're touching a Bible, having to open it, having to read it, have know it's like. So there's Bibles on the end caps, Bibles on the tables. Pass them around if you need one. If you brought your now, some people cheat and use their phone because you can get Bible Gateway on your phone. That's fine. So if you're on your phone, I'm trusting you're not watching Facebook during my sermon, right? You're not scrolling Facebook. If you're doing this, I know you're not reading the Bible. Okay, so we're going to look at some hopeless situations. We'll begin in Matthew chapter 9, and we're going to be looking at verse 18. Matthew chapter 9, verse 18. And we're going to look at this story of two people who were in a hopeless situation, and each of them, independent of each other, encountered Jesus. While he spoke these things to them, behold, a ruler came and worshipped him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." So Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples. And suddenly a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years, she came from behind and touched the hem of his garment, for she had said to herself, "If I only may touch his garment, I shall be made well." But Jesus turned around, and when he saw her, he said, "Be of good cheer, daughter, your faith has made you well." And the woman was made well from that hour. When Jesus came into the ruler's house, he saw the flute players and the noisy crowd wailing. And he said to them, "Make room, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him. But when the crowd was put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose, and the report of this went out into all the land. Great little story from Matthew. But Matthew left out some details. There was more to this story than Matthew. He just jotted down the synopsis of it. And years later, Peter would tell his version to his little protege, John Mark. And Mark would write his version down in the Gospel of Mark. So let's look at this same event from Peter's perspective, and it's found in Mark chapter 5. In Mark chapter 5, we're going to look at verse 21. So we're in Matthew. Next book of the Bible is Mark. Mark chapter 5, we're going to start verse 21. Same story, told from Peter's perspective. He gives us more detail. Now, when Jesus had crossed over again by the boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live." So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well." Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd, and he said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." And while he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a multitude and those who wept and wailed loudly. When he came in, he said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him, and he entered where the child was lying. And then he took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kumi," which is translated, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age, and they were overcome with great amazement. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know about it, and said that something should be given her to eat. Years later, after this was written, Luke was doing an investigation and talking to all the apostles, and he collected the same story from all of their perspectives, and the same story is told in the Gospel of Luke in chapter 8, verse 40. So let's take a look at his version, which has a couple extra details. Luke chapter 8, verse 40. So it was when Jesus returned that the multitude welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. And he fell down at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter about 12 years of age, and she was dying. But as he went, the multitudes thronged him. Now a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all her livelihood on physicians and could not be healed by any, came from behind and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her flowing of blood stopped. And Jesus said, "Who touched me?" When all denied it, Peter and those with him said, "Master, the multitudes and throngs press you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus said, "Somebody touched me, for I perceived power going out from me." Now, when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, she declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him, and how she was healed immediately. And he said to her, "Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking, someone came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to him, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher." But when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, "Do not be afraid. Only believe, and she will be made well." When he came into the house, he permitted no one to go in except Peter, James, and John, and the father and mother of the girl. Now all wept and mourned for her, but he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead but sleeping." And they ridiculed him, knowing that she was dead. But he put them all outside, took her by the hand, and called, saying, "Little girl, arise." Then her spirit returned, and she arose immediately, and he commanded that she be given something to eat. And her parents were astonished, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. Let's pray. Lord, I ask by the power of your holy word and through the power of your Spirit, you would open our hearts and our minds today. That Jesus, we would each know you differently. We would each know you better. We would each feel a special touch from you this morning through the power of your word and through the knowledge of who you are. So, Lord, we invite you into this space. Speak to us through this word. We ask in your holy name. Amen. All right, so two hopeless situations happening simultaneously. First guy we know is this guy named Jairus. We know from Luke his name is Jairus. We know he's a ruler of the synagogue. That means he is the leader of the what we would call the church building. He's in charge of all the stuff that goes on inside the synagogue in Capernaum. That makes him a high-ranking Jewish guy in their society. He's not the rabbi. He's not the one who does the teaching. He's the one who oversees all the finances, the upkeep of the synagogue, the materials inside of it. He's the business administrator of the synagogue. But he's going to be a very respected, very high-ranking person, extremely important. And we also know you don't get that position without being an extremely devout Orthodox Jew. So he has that position based on his standing in society. It's going to be an honorable one. It's going to be a respected one. It's going to mean he's a conservative Orthodox Jewish guy. And it also means in some ways that he has known the scriptures. He's the one that lines up the rabbis who come and speak. He's the one that if a rabbi is traveling through town, it would be Jairus who made sure that rabbi was invited to the synagogue to talk. That's who he is. We also know that Jesus is probably too far out of his box, because Jesus has been hanging out in Capernaum. Jesus has been doing miracles in Capernaum. Jesus has been teaching by the lakes of Capernaum. Jesus has already done the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has already healed people. And the interesting thing is, he hasn't been invited to speak in the synagogue. Who's responsible for that? Jairus is responsible for that. And he probably knows, I don't know who that guy is. And we're listening to him, we're studying, we don't know. I'm in cahoots with the Pharisees, the Sadducees. We're sitting here talking about this Jesus guy, and we are not ready to invite him to speak in the synagogue yet. That's who Jairus is. His 12-year-old daughter is sick and dying. Matthew just conflates the whole story and says she's already dead, because before this conversation even ends, the guys will come from the house and announce she's already dead. So Matthew just sort of, let's skip to the chase. She's already dead, right? So that's how Matthew's story goes. But Mark and Luke give us the detail that when Jairus goes to find Jesus, she's on death's door and dying. And Jesus has been gone overnight. He went over to the other side of the lake. He healed a demoniac guy, came back. There was this huge storm that had gone on. He had calmed the storm. The disciples were freaked out by him. He comes back and he gets on the shore. These crowds gather because he's back in town. They're all around, and Jairus makes his way through the crowd to find Jesus and say, "Get to my house, my daughter's dying." Now, Jesus is important. And you kind of wonder, it's like, well, how long has the girl been sick? Because, I mean, nobody goes from, she was up playing yesterday and she was great. She got sick last night and she's almost dead this morning, right? No, that's not how it works. We know how it works. It's like, you've been sick for a while. She's been laying in that bed for days, right? Let's be honest with each other. She's been sick. And she's been lying in that bed. And Jesus has been preaching and teaching and healing people and casting out demons and doing all this stuff. And you didn't think to get Jesus then? You didn't go get Jesus then. You're waiting until all the doctors have come. In fact, the reason they know she's dying, and it's so close, is by the time Jesus will even get to the house, the mourners have already been assembled. Right? That's how close they knew death's door was. And I've got to wonder, it's like, well, why didn't you go get Jesus when you had a chance? He's been hanging out for days. Why are you waiting to this moment to get him? You've been watching him preach along the seashore. He's only been gone overnight. And I think the answer is because Jesus is just a little too far outside my box. Jesus isn't one of us Pharisees. Jesus isn't in cahoots with us. Jesus isn't accepted yet. He's not quite normal. Jesus does things differently. And we're not sure what to think of him. And so I'm going to keep Jesus over there, arm's reach, until I'm sure. But see, the desperation of his one and only dying daughter changes all that. 12-year-old girl, which is about the time when they would have a bat mitzvah, where she would move from little girl to young woman. And this is a precious daughter to Jairus. He adores his little girl. She is daddy's girl. And she's dying. And she takes sick. Then he says, now it is too late. It's almost too late for anything. Now I'm going to go get Jesus. He pushes his way through the crowd, fights his way to the front, and says, my little daughter's sick. Will you come and heal her? Now, the human response to most of us would be, hey, dude, you had plenty of time to come find me for days on end, and you ignored me. You didn't want anything to do with me, and now you want me. Too late. Too bad for you. You should have come yesterday, right? That's the way most people are, right? You didn't come on my team. You didn't like me for several days. You didn't like me, but now you want something from me, right? But that's not Jesus. Jesus is like, oh, okay. I was waiting for the time to be right. Evidently, it's right now. Yeah, let's go. I'll heal her. Let's go, right? I mean, he's like so many of us in many ways. It's like Jesus doesn't refuse him. And I think this is phenomenal because you know what? I want to be reminded Jesus doesn't refuse me when I'm too late too. When I've postponed Jesus, when I've blown Jesus off, when I've laid Jesus aside, when I've not gone to Jesus right away, when I've tried to do it myself and find my own ways, and finally I get down to, I need Jesus, I better crawl to him for help. Jesus doesn't reject me either. And he won't reject you. Right? No matter how many times you've said, I didn't look to him, I didn't go to him, I didn't try, I didn't care about Jesus, but now I'm desperate and I need him. Jesus isn't going to say, too late. He's going to say, okay, you're finally ready. You got desperate enough. I was just sort of waiting for you to get hopeless. I was waiting for your situation to get hopeless because then I knew you'd come to me. And Jesus goes. He doesn't refuse him. I can't tell you how many times in my life I've seen people do this thing where suddenly their life falls apart and now they want God. And they usually want God rescue right away. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times people have come over the many years I've been pastoring and have sat in my office and said, my wife just filed for divorce or my husband's leaving me and I want you, pastor, to intervene right now and save my marriage in the next 24 hours. Right? It's like, dude, you've taken 14 years to run your marriage into the ground. You've treated your wife horribly, and now you want me to fix it in the next 24 hours, right? No, it ain't going to work that way. I can't do that, right? But we can begin. We can begin the process and figure those things out. That's when the situation, now honestly, in all those situations, it was already bad. Waited that long till the word divorce was thrown on the table, and then finally you say it's time to wake up. I've met people who were in businesses and didn't care about Jesus at all until suddenly the business partner absconded with all the money and skipped town and left them holding the bag and all the debt. And then suddenly they want Jesus. I've met people who were in situations where everything was fine, could care less about Jesus because their career's going, and I'm happy, and I'm climbing the corporate ladder, and then there were corporate layoffs, and they lost a job, and now they want Jesus. I've seen people who were cruising along just fine, ignoring everything to do with spirituality and life and God and everything. Oh, maybe they would attend church on Christmas and Easter like a good Christian would do. And then suddenly they struck ill, or someone in their family got diagnosed with cancer, and now they need Jesus. Right? And the weird thing is, to me, Jesus never refuses us. He never says, well, it's about time. Right? Jesus never says that. Jesus is like, cool, I was just waiting for you to be ready. He never rejects us. He never turns his back on us. He picks us up from where we are and says, if this is your starting point, let's go. And he starts moving. I think this is an interesting story because if I'm picturing myself, I'm Jairus, right? And I'm trying to save one of my daughters. She's on death's door, and the answer is about, 500 yards away down at the beach. I've walked down to the beach. I've got him. We're going to bring him back to my house, and he's going to cure my daughter before she dies. And the guy says yes. Come on, let's go. And as we're trying to get back to my house, all these idiot people are pressing in, trying to grab him, right? And if I'm Jairus, get your hands off him. Step away. We're trying to get through. Coming through. Sick girl needs his help. Coming through. Get out of the way. And the crowd doesn't care. They don't care. They're pressing in on Jesus. And like what should have taken only maybe a minute and a half walk is taking 15, 20 minutes. And he's like, my daughter's dying. And these guys are just trying to grab and touch Jesus because he's a celebrity. I would be mad. I don't know what you would be. I would be mad. I'd be pushing and shoving and grabbing people, grabbing them by the scruff of the neck and pulling them out of the way. I would do what it would be taken to save my daughter and get Jesus to my daughter, but that's what's happening here. Can you imagine his frustration and his fear? What it took to finally get down to the beach to even ask Jesus for help. And now that Jesus is coming to help him, all those other idiot people are stopping it from happening? Boy, that would drive me nuts. It's a hopeless situation. And in the middle of this, you're dragging Jesus, and suddenly Jesus stops and goes, whoa, who touched me? And like the whole thing stops cold. If I'm Jairus, I'm like, really, I'm hearing that, but who cares? Let's go. We got a daughter to heal. Let's get moving, right? That's how I'd be. But everything just stops right there because a second desperate person was in the crowd that day. This woman who had suffered for 12 years from constant bleeding. She could not get cured. No matter what she had done, she had spent all of her money and all of her time and everything she had to get cured of this bleeding problem. And nothing worked. Commentator William Barclay talks about this, and he mentions that the Talmud at that time had 11 cures for a woman who was in a state of constant bleeding and it couldn't be stopped. The Talmud described how to cure it. Some of them were tonics and astringents. Some of them might have worked. Others of them probably not. Because one was like, carry the ashes of a burned ostrich egg in a linen bag during the summer and a cotton bag in the winter, and it'll fix you right up. Right? You're walking around like, where am I going to get an ostrich egg to burn? For crying out loud, right? Well, there's a guy down at the market that has one. He's selling them for $1,000 a piece, but you can go get an ostrich egg, take it home and burn it. Make sure you put it in the right bag. Is it summer or winter yet, right? You do that kind of thing. Another one of the cures listed was to carry a barley corn, a little grain of barley corn, which had been found in the dung of a white female donkey. Oh, I should be able to pick one of those up at the market, no problem, right? Can you imagine all the things that she had done to try to get cured and healed? She had gone to the rabbis and gotten their advice and gotten their counsel, walked around saying, hey, sir, I notice you have a white donkey out there in your field, right? Can I go climb through its manure? Would you mind? He goes, well, that's a male donkey. Dang it. I need a female one, right? Oh, yeah, I don't got a female white donkey. White donkeys are pretty rare, you know. Hey, but my cousin Elmo, he's got one. He's about 4 villages over. So you got to hike all over there, crawl around in there and out there, and then suddenly, like, I could imagine his husband and wife standing at their kitchen windows like, honey, there's a woman out there climbing through the manure pile of the donkey out there, right? What's she looking for? And he says, oh, it's for medicinal purposes. She's trying to find a kernel of barley corn in its dung so she can be cured of healing, right? He said, well, did she pay you? Oh, yeah, I took some money from her. I'm not going to let her climb through our manure for free, right? Can you imagine all the things this woman had been through? And there's two texts that tell us, and not only did that not help, but it made her worse. Some of the cures made her even worse. She was living in chronic pain and poverty and suffering. That was her situation for 12 years. Now, there actually is an Old Testament law about this whole situation. It's found in Leviticus chapter 15. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, third book of the Bible, Leviticus chapter 15, and it describes what this situation is and what would happen to a woman who had this problem. Beginning in verse 25, here's what it says. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, other than at the time of her customary impurity, or if it runs beyond her usual time of impurity, all the days of her unclean discharge shall be as the days of her customary impurity. She shall be unclean. Every bed on which she lies all the days of her discharge shall be to her as the bed of her impurity, and whatever she sits on shall be unclean, as the uncleanness of her impurity. Whoever touches those things shall be unclean. He shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. But if she is cleansed of her discharge, then she shall count for herself 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. And on the 8th day she shall take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and bring them to the priest to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the priest shall offer the one as a sin offering, and the other as a burnt offering, and the priest shall make atonement for her before the Lord for the discharge of her uncleanness. Thus you shall separate the children of Israel from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness when they defile my tabernacle that is among them. This is the law for one who has a discharge, and for him who emits semen and is unclean thereby, and for her who is indisposed because of her customary impurity, and for one who has a discharge, either man or woman, and for him who lies with her who is unclean. Like, woo, there's some crazy stuff in the Old Testament, huh? You read this, it's like, what was God doing? God was saying, look, every once in a while someone's going to get a disease. And that disease is going to make them so that this blood flow is going to happen. And so when Jesus was mentioned, I say Jesus because Trinity, when he said, look, this is what you do. You take that person and you separate them from everyone else. I'm not going to, in my Old Testament, explain viruses and bacteria biology to you guys in, 4,000, it would have been about 4,000 years ago. I'm not going to explain that to you. I'm just going to tell you it's unclean. But the upshot of it was for this woman, she could not live with other people. She couldn't sit on a chair they could sit on. She couldn't lie in a bed they could be on. Anyone who touched her or her clothes was ritually unclean. She had to remove herself from the social fabric of other people and live independently and alone outside. The only other people she might be able to mix with is other women who are having their monthly time. Then she could probably mix with them. But by and large, she had to hide this, go secret, and live independently of everyone. And she'd spent all of her money trying to fix it. She is socially impure, she's unclean, and cannot mix with anyone else. In that culture, she cannot speak to a man unless spoken to first. To touch a man would have been bad, just a social impropriety for a woman to touch a man who was a stranger. But for an unclean woman to touch a man who was a rabbi, holy smokes, that's a major social problem. She's in this crowd and she's thinking, I've been at this for 12 years. No one can fix me. Maybe there was 1 or 2 family friends who'd break the social barrier and spend time with her, but by and large, over time, she's alone and outcast. If she was a teen when this whole thing started, it meant she'd never been married, she was never able to have kids or hold down a job. She had no husband and wasn't going to be able to get a husband. She's isolated, she's lonely, she's poor, she's emotionally crippled, she's lived in suffering and poverty for 12 years. And she says, Jesus can fix me. But nobody's going to take her to Jesus. Nobody's going to introduce her to him. Nobody's going to make sure that meeting happens. And so she has to find a way in herself to crawl through this crowd, reaching through, finding a way to get as close as she can to just touch his clothes. And then her plan is, if I could just touch his clothes and back off, I know his power can heal me because I've watched him healing other people. I trust who this guy is. I've heard his sermons. I believe in who he is. I believe in who he says he is. I think this guy is connected to God in a way nobody else is, and the power of God flows through him. All I got to do is touch his garment, and I'm going to be made well. And she will stop at nothing to get to that point where she can touch him. She had to fight through the crowd, crawl through it, be unknown, be unseen until she could get there. And she gets the miracle. She gets the miracle. And Jesus stops in his tracks with this "who touched me" business, right? And the disciples were like, "Are you kidding? Everybody's touching you. Everybody's trying to get a piece of you, Jesus. What do you mean, who touched you? She didn't, he didn't, her didn't. They all tried to touch you. We've only walked 2 blocks and everybody here has tried to grab hold of you. What do you mean, who touched me? What are you talking about?" And Jesus says, "Oh no, one touch was different than everybody else's. One touch mattered. Everybody else was just grabbing for the celebrity issue. One touch, power went out. One touch was the touch of faith. One touch was the touch of belief. That's the one I care about. I don't care about any of the others." There's 4 things that hopeless situations do for us. When our relationship with God comes, I've looked at this text, and I've looked at him in my own life, and I've watched him in other people's lives, and it's interesting because I've realized hopeless situations create 4 things in us that drive us to God. The first thing is we stop caring what other people think, right? Both Jairus and this woman stopped caring what other people thought. Jairus had all that time to meet Jesus, but he cared too much what other people think and the social appropriateness and what would my fellow guys think, what would my rabbis think, what would my other synagogue rulers think, what would the respectable people in society think if I brought Jesus into the synagogue and invited him to speak. No, I'm not going to do that. But when his daughter was dying, it made him say, I don't care what anybody else thinks. My daughter needs saving, and that's the only hope she has is that guy over there. I'm going to get him. I'm going to bring him into my house. I'm going to make sure he has a chance to stand over my daughter and cure her. He no longer cares what anyone thinks. The woman with the bleeding issue did not care anymore about the social improprietness for her to be there. She's like, if I can just touch him, I'll be healed. And she fights through a crowd in a place she's not supposed to be, touching people she's not supposed to touch, in a situation she's supposed to avoid, all so she could get to Jesus. When you're in a desperate situation, you don't care what anybody thinks anymore. You just want God. You want Jesus, and you will pay whatever price it takes to find him. That's an interesting thing. I love this verse in Matthew chapter 10. There's a verse that says, if you acknowledge me, therefore whoever confesses me before men, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. That's a powerful verse, isn't it? Jesus saying, oh, are you embarrassed by me? Oh, you don't want your friends to know? Oh, you don't want your business associates to know? Oh, you don't want your family to know you care about me? Oh, that's okay. I'll mention the same thing to God when your name comes up. Right? That's a tough verse. But he says, but if you confess me before people, if you're not embarrassed to know me and to say my name and that kind of thing, then okay. Then I won't be embarrassed to mention you to my Father when we're standing in the throne room of the most powerful entity in the universe. It's like, that's a powerful verse. And a lot of us are kind of shy about that. The second thing I realize is our faith becomes simple and not complex. Your faith gets really simple when you're in a hopeless situation, which means I just need Jesus. I need Jesus here, and I need Jesus now, and I know what Jesus needs to do. When you're in a hopeless and desperate situation and you know you need Jesus, somehow discussing whether or not the rapture is going to be pre, mid, or post-tribulation doesn't matter so much. Right? When you're in a hopeless situation and you're going down and your life is falling apart and it's desperate and it's broken and you are frustrated with whether or not you're going to survive and make it to the next level, you suddenly don't really care about end times prophecy, right? You think we're living in the last days, right? Who cares if we're living in the last days? I'm in my last days, right? You suddenly don't care about doctrine, theology. Were there dinosaurs on the ark? What about? You don't think about any of those crazy questions. When you're desperate for Jesus, it's like, I just need Jesus and I need him now. Your faith becomes really simple. It doesn't get complicated, and you don't bog it down with a bunch of questions that are just theological smoke. I think that's very interesting. You want to get to Jesus, you want to get there quick, and you want to stay there. I think about that a lot when I look at situations in, like, when we go to church. And I've done it. I know you've done it too. There's many times I've gone to church, and I ain't so desperate to meet Jesus. It's church, we go. Oh, you're supposed to, or you're paid to, right? For crying out loud, you go to church, right? We've all been there, days when we've gone to church, and it's like, am I going to church because I really think I'll meet God today? Am I desperate for Jesus? Is Jesus going to show up and talk to me today? And sometimes it's like, I was going to church, but those questions didn't even cross my mind. And they should, really, for all of us, they should. We should be going because, I'm going to meet God today. He's going to speak to me. He's going to say something to me. He's going to open up my mind and my heart and his word, and I'm going to step. I'm going to meet Jesus today, and that's what I'm desperate for, not just to attend a church service. I like the passage in Hebrews chapter 11 when it talks about faith, because people in hopeless situations, they know what they're hoping for. If you're in a hopeless situation, you know what you're hoping for. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That's interesting. The substance of something hoped for. That's almost a contradiction, isn't it? The substance is something you can have. It's touchable, it's tangible, it's real. It's something, it's a substance. Faith is the substance of something you're hoping for, which hasn't happened yet. That's a definition to meditate on. And a few verses later it says, but without faith it's impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. You cannot please God unless you come to him in faith. Most Americans do not come to God in faith. Most Americans come to God with this attitude of, he has to prove himself to me. If he proves himself to me, then I'll believe in him. And the God of the universe is like, yeah, I don't have to do anything for you. I'm God, right? When you come to me in faith, you'll get answers. And I guarantee, I've used this illustration before, it's true. It's like, without faith, you're a colorblind person demanding to someone explain that shows you red. You're colorblind. You can't see red. And so you sit there saying, well, everybody else talks about red, but I don't believe in it. Prove to me red exists, because I can't see it. Faith is the ability to see God, and God says, without faith, you're never going to see me, right? You could go to some happening place where you're in a revival meeting and healings are taking place in the main room and stuff's going down and people are having, they're crippled or being healed and the blind are having their eyes open. You could be there in that very place, and you know what God will make sure happens to you if you don't have any faith? You'll get stuck in the bathroom talking to somebody you don't want to talk to. I actually had that happen to me once at a revival. I went down to Bethel Church to meet God, and some idiot in the bathroom wouldn't shut his mouth and stop talking to me. I want to be out there where the action was, right? I don't know what I'd done wrong, but evidently I'd done something big. And that's what God says, no, without faith you won't see these things. Your faith becomes simple and not complex. For 12 years, Jairus got the joy and pleasure of his only daughter. And he was going to do anything to keep that daughter going. For 12 years, this woman bled, was poor, was a social outcast. She was going to do anything to change that. And all that meant was get to Jesus. Third thing I realized is we humbly come to Jesus and we let him be God. You humbly come to Jesus and you let him be God. They did not come to Jesus demanding to know how he was going to do this. Jairus didn't show up and said, hey, my daughter's dying. I would like you to heal her because I know you have the power to heal, but I want you to explain it to me first, how you have this power and what you're going to do if I bring you into her bedroom to heal her. Explain how this will go down. He doesn't demand that Jesus sort of explain himself first. It's like, Jesus is like, I don't have to, I don't have to explain anything to you. I'm going to go because I'm going to heal your daughter. And Jairus is not demanding that explanation in advance. There's no negotiation going on here. There's no sitting down offering Jesus something in exchange for the healing. Neither from him nor from the woman. They're not saying, if you'll heal my daughter or if you'll heal my bleeding issue, I'll serve you or I'll go do this for you or I will do something for you. There's no negotiation. It's simply, you have the answer to fix me. And I'm not going to demand that you prove yourself first or explain yourself first. And I'm not going to even try to offer that I will give you something in exchange. You just come and do this. See, when you're in a hopeless situation, you get humble really fast because you know only Jesus can answer. And there's nothing you can give Jesus that he needs. Right? And there's no demand. You don't sit outside still critiquing and judging Jesus and making him explain himself before he gives you the answer because you're desperate for the answer on whatever terms he gives it. The fourth thing I realized with these people in hopeless situations is that they get a unique relationship with Jesus. This woman, her example is amazing. All she wants to do is touch his clothes and get away, right? She has no plan to talk to him. She has no plan for anyone else to even see what happens. Her plan is touch his clothes, get healed, sneak out of the crowd, I'll be well, he'll never even know I was there. That's her plan. The Son of God will never even know I was there. And so she comes to touch his garment. It's a weird word in the Greek. Actually, literally what she's touching is the tassel on the four corners of his garment. Jewish men by law had to have tassels on the garment, front, right and left, back, right and left. And they would have to hang down a little bit below the outer tunic. By law, that was in the Old Testament. So Jesus is wearing that. And the tassels were interesting because what the tassels represented were the books of the Old Testament. And they were woven together with certain numbers of strands. And the numbers of strands would be, these are the 5 books of the Torah, these are the books of the prophets, these are the other books. And they were woven with numbers of strands. And they would hang down at a certain level, right below the hem of his garment, right below the edge of the garment. These tassels would hang down. And the point of those tassels was that they were reminding men, whenever they took off their clothes or put on their clothes, they belonged to God. You belong to me. You're not like the Gentile, the other nations. You're one of mine. You're my child. You belong to me. Modern times it shifted. They don't wear them on the outside tassels. They're usually on the prayer shawl now. The tassels are on a prayer shawl. In Jesus' time, it would be on the clothes. What she's literally touching is one of those tassels. She's touching the Jesus connection to God of the Old Testament. That's what she's touching, right? This guy is connected to the law and the God of the Old Testament, and what he carries on his person is the reminder of the Mosaic law, the reminder of the law of God in those tassels. If I could just touch the tassel that's hanging on him, the connection he has with God will flow to me and I'll be healed by God. That's what she's thinking. He stops the whole crowd, right? Who touched me? And already it's definitive. Her touch was different than everybody else's. Her touch was the only one that mattered to Jesus. And she has to kind of fess up. I didn't, I'm not supposed to. I know by law, I'm probably going to be cursed now because I, unclean person, touched a clean person. But here's the thing about Jesus. Our dirty never rubs off on Jesus. His clean always rubs off on us. Right? We can't take, his clean is always more powerful than our dirty. And he turns with her and he says to her, daughter. It's a term of endearment. It's a term of intimacy. It's a term of a special relationship. When he calls her daughter, that's a sweetheart kind of term in their culture. She was going to touch the Son of God and hope the Son of God never noticed she was there. The Son of God was going to make sure that she realized how important she was, that she doesn't get to sneak away. She is daughter. Daughter, your faith has made you well. I think Jesus did that for 2 reasons. First reason, I think, is that she needs to know it wasn't the clothes, it was him and her faith. He's not going to let superstition go down. He's not going to have this superstitious thing where the clothes had the power, the tassel had the power. He's not going to let her keep thinking that. He wants her to know it was your relationship to me that was what mattered, not your relationship to the tassel on my clothes. So he's going to break that problem thinking right there. And the second thing he's doing is he's declaring her clean in front of everybody who had been rejecting her for 12 years. He's declaring her okay, clean, pure, wonderful, acceptable, bring her back into the fold. He's not going to let her slink away, still having to prove herself to the society around her. He's going to declare her clean in front of everybody so they all know it. I think that's pretty cool. See, when Jesus restores, he doesn't just do it lightly. He does it in a huge way. Almost all of the people in the crowd that day, by the way, have disappeared from history. We know the disciples. We know their names. Because of the text, we know Jairus' name. This woman, she goes down in history. We will know her. She will be studied. She'll be read about in every culture, in every place on the globe, in multiple languages around the world today. This woman is still studied. Think about that. Everybody else in the crowd that day was looking for, I don't know, the show. I want to see the show of Jesus. She was in the faith of Jesus. And 2,000 years have gone by, and we're still studying this woman. We actually don't know her name, but the Catholic Church tradition would say that her name is Saint Veronica. And in the Catholic tradition, their liturgy, their history, the oral histories that got passed down, in their study of Jesus stumbling at the cross, there's a woman who steps forward out of the crowd when he stumbles on the cross, and she mops his face with a handkerchief. And his blood and the image of his face would remain on the handkerchief. That's Saint Veronica. They think it's this woman. She would pass down through history because of her faith. Jairus and his daughter, the unique relationship they got. Jairus is told she's dead. Can you imagine how that would have felt? I made it all the way down to the beach. Against my better judgment, I finally decided to go to Jesus. I got Jesus. I'm bringing him back. We're on limited time. These idiot people won't let go of him. They won't get out of the way so we can hurry up and get home so he can heal my daughter. He stops the crowd to heal this one woman. For crying out loud, she's been bleeding for 12 years. She could hold it for another day. Right? That's what you'd think he'd be going on. And then before they even get to his house, the servants come and say, it's too late. She died. It's too late. Your answer is too late. The hopeless situation, the thing you didn't want to have happen, did happen. And I look at how he must have felt. That was rock bottom. And I imagine he was beating himself up in that instant for, why didn't I go to Jesus a day or two ago? Why didn't I go to him before? Because now it's too late. She died. You waited one day too long. But Jesus is like, no, we're good to go. Let's still do this. And I don't know how he must have felt. He's like, what? Yeah, don't worry about it. I got it covered. We'll go anyway. And I'm sure he's thinking, what? They go to the house. The mourners have already kicked in, right? You had to have professional mourners in those days. In fact, 2 flutes and 1 female singer was mandatory for even the most poor person. If somebody died in the house, you had to have at least 2 flute players, even if you were poor, and 1 singing woman who would wail on behalf of everybody. The mourners and the flute players were already lined up. That's how bad this girl was, right? This is their paid profession. They would go and they would sing. The flutes were shrill and harsh, so much so that Roman law finally limited it to 10 flute players maximum. Sorry. Right? I don't care how rich you are. You only get 10 flute players because we can't stand the racket, right? Claudius the emperor died, and they had so many flute players that Seneca, the famous Roman historian, said, I'm sure that even though Claudius is dead, he's still hearing the flutes, right? So it was unbelievable. And they've got these guys coming in, and these guys were professional. They raised this wailing racket, right? And early travelers to the Middle East in the 17 and 1800s saw professional mourners and these ladies who would wail and cry and sing songs and dirges and laments while the flutes were playing. And they were so good because they knew the villages so well that when somebody else walked in, and they would say, oh, be with this poor little girl who's in your hands, God. And somebody would walk in and say, just like Betsy Johnson, who died last year. And Betsy Johnson was my aunt. Oh, now I'm crying because of Betsy. I miss her so much. And they knew everybody who had died, and they'd weave them into the songs. So everybody in the room would be crying, right? Whether you thought of this person or not. They were great at this, and they were experts at it. And Jesus walks in, and he makes sure that they're doing this job, and he says, no, you guys, you all need to get out. And he says, she's not dead, she's just sleeping. Now, what do you think these people were experts at? Flute players, mourners, singers. They were experts at knowing when somebody had died, because they don't get paid if someone ain't dead. And all they do is be around dead people all the time. So do you think the flute players and the mourners started in before she died, or do you think they double-checked and made sure? I think they double-checked and made sure. It's their job. And so when Jesus says she's not dead, she's only asleep, they're like, who do you think you are? We do this for a living. We're around dead people all day long, every day, single day. You aren't. She's dead, and they're having something. He's like, get out, get out. So Jesus kicks everybody out. Interesting, he had all the other disciples hold off back the crowd because he's only bringing in Peter, James, and John. They're the only ones who get in there, and the mom and dad. And they go into the room, and they stand over this little girl, and Jesus uses two words that are Aramaic, one of the few Aramaic phrases in the Bible. He says, Talitha ka'um. That's what he actually says. It's not Greek, it's not Hebrew, it's Aramaic. It's a diminutive little term. It's like saying, princess, sweetie pie, honey, wake up. He's using this term for her that is a diminutive little expression. And what's interesting is only Mark records that because Mark was Peter's account, right? Peter never forgot that. Peter never forgot standing in that room, hearing Jesus stand over that girl saying, Talitha ka'um, honey, princess, wake up. That term of endearment, that gentleness, that intimacy that Jesus had with her, because he'd watched a lot of miracles and would watch many more before it was all said and done, but he always remembered the specialness of this one because of what Jesus said and the way he said it. And he would record it years later in Mark's account. Forever, she and her parents would have this special relationship with Jesus. He says, don't tell anybody. By the way, don't tell anybody, right? The bleeding woman he calls out publicly so that everyone knows she's healed. The little girl, he says, don't tell anybody. I'm not sure why he did that. One of them, he wants to make sure everybody sees that she's clean and whole and restored to society. The other one, it's like, I want you to keep this one quiet. He changes those things. People rescued from hopeless situations get that special intimacy with Jesus. I think that's the thing we're all looking for. In the end, what we're looking for is not just to be a face in the crowd or a number on a list of people who are going to go to heaven. We want to know, does the Son of God know me? Does he care about me? Does he know my hurts and fears and strengths and weaknesses, desires and dreams? And in both of these stories, the answer seems to be Jesus demonstrates, yep, he does. Yes, he does. And people in the hopeless situations tend to come to him and they bow before him and they find him and they reach out and they fight whatever they got to fight to touch him. They got to fight through the crowds. They don't care what anybody thinks. Their faith is super simple. Get to Jesus. That's all that matters. If I could just get to Jesus, everything else will make sense. I think one step slightly deeper is instead of getting to Jesus to fix a problem, is getting to Jesus just because he's Jesus. Right? I love it when Jesus fixes my big problems. I love that when he comes to the rescue. I don't like being in a situation. It makes him have to come to the rescue. He likes that, but I don't. But then I realize what I learned about him and who he is. But then there comes a point when it's like, well, what about, I'm not in a hopeless situation. I'm just desperate for Jesus. I just want to hold him, touch him. I want him to speak to me. I want to have that feelings of Jesus around me. I want Jesus for the sake of Jesus and not for what he's going to do for me. And I think that's when we're at the deepest place of all in our faith. I just want Jesus for Jesus. I asked Darren, I said, he had a song he was going to play, and I said, save that one for the end, because I think we need to sing that as we close. So as Darren comes up, there's this song, Nothing Else, that Cody Carnes wrote. And the lyrics are, I'm caught up in your presence, I just want to sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment, and I never want to leave. I'm not here for blessings, Jesus. You don't owe me anything. More than anything that you could do, I just want you. And I think so many times in our Christian life, we want Jesus for what he can do. But the deepest, most powerful situations in our lives are when it's like, I'm not even in a hopeless situation anymore. I trust him in those. I've been in so many of them now, I'm like, he'll come through. I don't know what he'll do, but he comes through. Drives me nuts, but he comes through. That's why I've lost all my hair and gone gray. Right? But then Jesus is looking for something deeper, which is sometimes don't wait for it to be a hopeless situation. Just press in for me. So I would like it if we would close this service singing this song together. Would you stand as we sing Nothing Else?
I'm caught up in your presence. I just want to sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment. I never want to leave. Oh, I'm not here for blessings. Jesus, you don't owe me anything more than anything that you can do. I just want you. I'm sorry when I've just gone through the motions. I'm sorry when I just sang another song. Take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you. I'm sorry when I've come with my agenda. I'm sorry when I forgot that you're enough. Take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you. I'm caught up in your presence. I just want to sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment. I never want to leave. Oh, I'm not here for blessings. Jesus, you don't owe me anything more than anything that you can do. I just want you. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. I'm caught up in your presence. I just want to sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment. I never want to leave. Oh, I'm not here for blessings. Jesus, you don't owe me anything more than anything just want you.
So some of you may be wondering, I want to try to touch Jesus, but how do I find him? I mean, he's not walking on the earth today. And I'd say, well, there he is. He's in the book. If you don't have a Bible, take one of these home and just start reading his story, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Figure out who he is, what he's done, what he said with other people. And then when you're driving in your car and you're by yourself, invite him to sit in the passenger seat. Imagine him there and start talking to him. Tell him what's going on in your life. Tell him what you're scared of. Tell him your hopes, your dreams. You don't have to be in your car. You can do it at home, sitting in a chair, maybe in your backyard or on your porch or your patio. Just pull up a second chair. Invite Jesus to sit in that chair. Pour your heart out to him. And then here's the catch, which this is the part we usually miss. Then stop and listen in your mind for what he says back. That's usually the part we skip. We pour out and then we leave. But listen in your mind for what he says back to you. And I'll tell you this, if he criticizes or yells, that ain't Jesus talking. Jesus never yells and he never criticizes. And begin to press in to say, Lord, I want bigger answers. Figure out who he is and take time to talk to him that way. Not like, oh, Lord, I come to pray before you, but just like you'd talk to a friend. Sitting in your car, or sitting in your back porch, or in a room in your house, definitely pull up that other chair and listen for his response. Lord God, so many of us are desperate to avoid hopeless situations, but they come at us anyway because that's what life does. My prayers for the people in the sound of my voice, Lord, that in any hopeless situation that they're in right now or one that's coming, is they'll find you. Press into you until they find an answer. Fight through the crowds, not care what anybody else thinks. Let go of all the bigger questions, not negotiate with you, not demand that that you explain yourself first, but just press in until we can touch you. And you can give the answers that change and transform and renew our lives. Lord, some people, even this morning, right here in this room, there are hopeless situations going on right now. They're exhausted, they're tired, they're run down, they're discouraged, they're in despair over this situation that they may have been in for years, or others of them had just dropped on them like a bomb recently. And so I'm going to pray, Lord, for those people in those hopeless situations, and they know who they might be within the sound of my voice right now, that your power would go forth right now, your healing power, your fixing power, your restoration power, your redeeming power. And if each and every person would know it was Jesus who did it. Jesus who fixed my problem. It was the Son of God who wouldn't ignore me, but came to me when I cried out to him. They would all know it, Lord, to the praise and the honor and the glory of your name and who you are and what you've done for us. This we pray in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God bless all of you. Have a great 4th of July. We got some fun stuff happening in July. End of the month, we're going to be doing a service in the park with a barbecue. You'll love it.